The flipping game is relatively quick. And so it's a speculative strategy because you are estimating that by the time you're selling it, things will still be good. But the question is what happens when things aren't so good? And, the market, as we're seeing right now, is very fickle. Like buyers 1 minute are bidding 100K over, the next minute they're bidding under. And so as a flipper, if you don't understand that the market has a huge impact on your profit margins, you can be in a lot of hot water very easily because you've spent a couple 100K on renovations, you've put in all that time and all that effort. And if your numbers weren't tight at the buying end, at the selling end, you're going to be in for a shock.
What comes to mind when you hear the term flipping houses? Have you ever wondered what goes on behind the scenes? Our guest, Abby Soetan, shares her experiences with the strategy when she started out as a newbie investor, as well as investor tips for your next renovation project. Let's jump into the episode.
You're listening to the Black Wealth Effect podcast, where we're all about inspiring the next generation of Black Canadian real estate investors to succeed financially. If you're tuned in, that means you're hungry to take action and build wealth outside of your 9-to-5. We'll be sitting down with Black real estate investors, entrepreneurs, and allies to discuss a diverse set of topics to help you along your investing journey. Let's get started.
Welcome back to another podcast episode. We have our special guest today, Abby. Abby, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Doing really good. How are you guys?
We're doing good. Happy to have you
Awesome.
on.
Thank you. Glad to be on.
So, Abby, I've known you for quite a while. Been following you heavily. We chatted here and there. You have quite a following on social media and YouTube. But for many of our audience members who don't know who you are, could you, take a minute and give us a high level overview of, who Abby is and what do you do as an investor?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Guess I'm still figuring that out too. But yeah, so like Ron said, I'm Abby. I've been in real estate for the last 2 years. Started like right at the beginning of the pandemic, which I guess was a fun time to start when everything locked down.
Right.
But it proved itself to be a great time to start because we were all home anyway. So it really gave me a good amount of time to focus. My first strategy when I got into real estate was flipping. So the way I learned how to flip was really through watching HGTV. I don't know whether I had a lot of positive energy or what it was, because we all know HGTV is a lie. But
facts.
I saw it. I started watching Fixer Upper and all these shows that show people flipping houses. And I was like, I can do this. Like, this is feasible. Like, I have no experience, but it seems fine. And like 2 weeks later, I remember after reading a book by Chip and Joanna Gaines, I told my husband, I was like, yeah, we're going to buy a house. We're going to flip it. And he was just like, oh God, this girl has come again. And eventually we bought a house a couple of weeks later.
Wow.
And we started doing the renovations ourselves, a complete gut. 10 out of 10 would not recommend, because we had no experience. It took a long time to flip that house because we were just it was just both of us. But at the end of the day, we learned so much. I learned so much about the interiors of a house, and also just the business of real estate, dealing with contractors, but also like the regulations, things that make or break your business. So it was a learning on the job experience. After we flipped that house, got another one, and it just continued thereafter. So I would say it's definitely been a good journey, It's sometimes a difficult one, but I think it's worth it at the end of the day.
So much to unpack there. I think if Action Taker was a person, it would be you.
If jumping in without really thinking was a person, it would also be me.
But it turned out pretty good. And like, again, you got so much experience. Like you could walk into a room, sounding confident. Like, yeah, like, a contractor can't take you for a ride. You know
For
what I mean?
sure.
So,
for sure.
I mean, like there was so much that came out from just taking that simple action, right?
Yeah. And I mean, with that, I've had so many experiences where, I would get a quote for a job and the contractor would give me this full story of what the job needed and say it would cost tens of thousands. And I'm looking at him like, yeah, I've done this before. I'm pretty sure it requires 2 nails and a piece of some glue, And so once I explain it, they're like, how long have you been doing this? I'm like, look, I learned through the struggle. So don't try to cheat me here.
School of Hard Knocks.
Yeah, School of Hard Knocks. That's what it is.
So we were doing a little bit of research and I came across the fact that you started flipping when you were on maternity leave.
Yes.
So that's wild. That's wild. So let's unpack that.
Yeah. So I had my baby in April of 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And we bought that first property in November. It closed in November. So whatever the math was, let's say he was about 6 months, thereabout. Wow. And yeah, that was, again, if jumping in without thinking fully was a person, let's say it like that. Because, when I talk to other people and I tell them that and they look at me like, are you okay? And I'm like, I wasn't 100% sure. But at the same time, I felt like there was no better time than, at that point. And I still feel exactly the same way because now that I have, they're 3 and 4 years old, it's not easier. I mean, it never gets easier. So for me, it's like, if you can do something at any point, then just do it, because as life keeps going, things keep changing, you'll have more and more responsibilities. And so, might as well just start. Right.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, why flipping? What inspired you? You said HGTV, but yes. I'm like, it sounded like you had the bug before because your husband's like, not again. So it sounded like you had the bug, but why flipping instead of the traditional buy and hold that everyone is accustomed to doing?
Yeah, I think primarily we had no money. So theoretically, flipping is a good strategy to build capital. So that's why it made the most sense. And also because we had no money, we figured that we could do a live-in flip and solve the issue of how do I hold a mortgage and still pay my rent or pay my mortgage at the same time. So it was sort of a calculated decision, even though living through a flip with 2 babies, can't say I calculated that too much. But yeah, that was the rationale behind it. I think that for me, I knew to get into real estate, I needed some capital, but it was easier to buy a property as my primary residence, right? Because here you only have to put 5% down. So I figured if I could just put 5% down, of purchase price at that point was $325K. So that was about $16,500. And so that was a feasible amount for me to put down. And the goal was to flip it myself, reduce the contractor and labor costs, all of that, the material costs, because, I'm pretty frugal. So I would find things off of Facebook Marketplace or Kijiji. And then once we flipped it, sell it for a profit. At that point, I can't say that I had a full analysis like I would have now. Right. But it was buy low, sell high. That was kind of my strategy. And it worked out, thankfully.
Yeah. And I feel like at a certain price, you couldn't fail, right? So that was important.
Yeah, it wasn't going to get cheaper at that point. I knew because I had been one of those people in the previous years that I would look at the market and be like, you know what, I'll wait for things to go down a little bit. And, I say on my Instagram every now and then, just to remind other people that The first time that I wanted to buy a property was in 2013. I think it was just after I graduated from university. And it was a condo in Mississauga, and it was on sale for 280K. And it was pretty good size. Maybe it was like a 2-bedroom. And I looked at it and I just thought, that is ridiculous. It's way too high. Who will ever buy a condo for 280K? And there's so much regret from that point because, of course, now that would easily sell for over 800. So yeah, every time I think about that, I just remind myself it's not going to get any lower, at least not lower comparatively to what it was a couple years ago.
Absolutely. And you mentioned early in the conversation that, no prior experience in construction. With that sort of a knowledge gap, how did you go about, filling that knowledge gap? And, could you kind of walk us through that first, flip project and, from acquisition to sale and, how hands-on were you? And I guess share some high level numbers.
Yeah, sure. So no prior experience. And the way I got through it was the school of YouTube. Really, every single thing that I needed to know how to do, whether it was installing flooring or painting, my husband dabbled in some electrical, it was YouTube. And it was a bunch, if you looked at my Google history at that point, it was how to install this, how to fix this, and how to fix something that I did wrong the first time. That was really the way I learned. I'm a visual learner, so I learn very well by seeing other people do. My husband ended up reading a couple of books. I just could not do it, but it really helped by watching them. One of the main people that I watched was Home Renovision DIY.
From Ottawa.
Yeah, that guy. He was really good because he breaks every single thing down.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a lot of series on everything, really. So it was at the point where we were at the drywall phase, I was watching all those drywall videos. At the point where we were in the flooring, the painting, all of those things, it was a step-by-step process. So when people ask me, I'm like, it takes time. Anything that if you ask a contractor and they say it will take 2 days, multiply that by 4 and add a couple of days if you're a newbie, because it will take that long and longer sometimes.
Right.
So it's, it was really about, were we willing to put in that effort to learn and be slow at it? So in terms of buying the property, I found it on the MLS. I didn't overthink it, which I feel like a lot of people do nowadays, but I saw a property. I had a general criteria in my head of what I was looking for. So something that was a bit run down. It was in an area that was up and coming. So kind of like a B class neighborhood, because I figured that over time that neighborhood would appreciate. And in terms of the pricing, I just looked at the comparable properties, figuring out, what they sold for, when they were fully renovated, and then what other properties that were not renovated sold for. So at that time, when I saw the first one that I bought, there was a second property nearby that was on the market that was fully done. And I believe that property was on sale for 450K, and mine was on the market for 350 thereabout. So I'm not even sure how I did the math, but I figured that I would spend around 50K on the renovations. And so if I could get it for around 320, 325, then I would be all in for about 375, plus or minus closing costs. I would make a bit of money if I could sell it for 450. And that was pretty spot on, because I ended up spending about 40 something K on the renovations, which now that I look at it, that was incredible. But it was also because I put in so much of my time and hired so little. And so once we eventually sold the property the following January, we sold it at 512. because at that point, the market had started to pick up. So this was like the very first time that the market was going crazy, just during the pandemic or shortly after the main part. So that was a really good profit because I believe we made over 130K on it. And so it was one of those things that I look back on and I'm like, thankfully I jumped into it, because if I hadn't, if I had just kept waiting and thinking, okay, maybe the market will go down, or if I had used my lack of knowledge or lack of experience to say, I can't do this, then I would never have learned so much, not even like just the financial gain, but really that mental gain as well.
And how did that feel? Like, I imagine that must have definitely helped
Oh,
building your confidence once you jumped in.
It felt amazing. Like I remember the day, and like going back a little bit, we ended up selling the property ourselves without a realtor too. I think I was just in that complete DIY, like just do everything myself mode, because now I'm just like, why? Why do I keep doing these things? But I wanted to get that experience too. I was like, what does it really take to sell a property? Let me try it myself.
I think you should put that on a shirt, Abby.
Like,
DIY. Just that's your thing. Just put DIY on a
at
shirt.
At this point, like I feel like, yeah. But so we ended up selling the property ourselves, doing all like, staging it, listing it. And I remember the day we held offers, and that was an experience, because I had realtors calling me constantly throughout the day. And I was like, this is why I'm not a realtor. I won't do this again because I see what you guys are doing. I don't recommend it either. So it was a good experience though, because I knew that we had put in value into the property and we had increased the value, and we were seeing that through so much interest. I think at that point we had maybe 4 or 5 offers, and looking through them, we had estimated 450K because that was the comparable price at that time. So when the lowest offer that we had was that 450, it was like, wow, like it's incredible. So on one hand, I'm also happy because the market, I was happy for myself because the market went up. I mean, sad for the buyers at that point, but it was what it was. I was also a buyer too, so because I was looking for another property. So it was like, yay, and also this sucks too, depending on the end I was looking from.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And there are a few things you touched on there that I want to unpack a little bit more. But going back to kind of your inspiration to get started, I know you talked about HGTV, and obviously, like, they're not a sponsor of our show, but like I want to go a little bit deeper on that. And so much of like what the media portrays flipping as, or like the experience and the strategy, like they make it seem easy. And so I know you talked about both like a little bit, a few of the challenges as well as some of the wins you had just going through that first flip. Can you talk a little bit more about like just the realities associated with the strategy and what like maybe a first time investor or even experienced flipper should think about before actually flipping that next property?
Yeah. This is an easy one for me, for sure. Because with HGTV, when you watch all these flipping shows, you're watching like an hour or sometimes half an hour of work of what seems like, it's just a short thing. Like they just pick up a house and a couple of days later, it's gone, sold for 100K over asking. And it's so far from reality. So complete, like whatever you see, just believe it's first a lie and then try and find the truth in between it. Because I don't think I understood how much time it would take. When I went in, it's not that I expected that it would be done in just like a couple of weeks, but I think just watching the shows and seeing things transform, you see it really quickly. And so I remember we would be particular stages. So like, when we did demo took us like almost 3 weeks. I mean, it was our first time doing demo, but at some point I thought, will this demo never end? Like, will we forever be demolishing this place. It will never end. And that is it messes with your mind, truthfully, because we've already demoed the house. We can't give it back. There's no turning back at this point. We have to go forward. But I have so much regret that I started this. And so that happened constantly. There were long nights, and I said I had a baby, I had 2 kids, but an infant as well. And there were nights where it was like my husband and I were doing shift work. Like, okay, one person is at the house doing something, the other person is watching the kids. And really just depending on your life stage, like if you're someone in my life stage, it's possible to do it, but it is a sacrifice. It takes time, and whatever budget that you thought it would take as well. Yeah, you should increase that for sure. You should multiply that and definitely add a couple grand to it too, because, you just never know once you start opening up walls, you don't know what you're going to find. And I think there was a point where we opened up a wall and we discovered there was a plumbing leak and that had to be fixed. And it's like, if you don't budget for things like that, they will happen probably. And then I think another thing too is understanding the market. My first flip was pretty ideal because at the point where we were selling it, the market was up. But I remember my second flip, the market was kind of in between. We still ended up selling it for higher, but at the same time, I realized that any lower and we would have either broken even or made a loss because the flipping game is relatively quick. And so it's a speculative strategy because you are estimating that by the time you're selling it, things will still be good. But the question is what happens when things aren't so good? And, the market, as we're seeing right now, is very fickle. Like buyers 1 minute are bidding 100K over, the next minute they're bidding under. And so as a flipper, if you don't understand that the market has a huge impact on your profit margins, you can be in a lot of hot water very easily because you've spent a couple 100K on renovations, you've put in all that time and all that effort. And if your numbers weren't tight at the buying end, at the selling end, you're going to be in for a shock.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like definitely knowing your market, as you said, extremely important. Being nimble and staying ahead and on top of trends definitely can make or break a flip for sure.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned a little bit about kind of the balancing act between you and your husband in terms of like managing the renovations, like having that experience with a live-in flip, as well as just managing family life as well. Were there any specific like systems or tools that you kind of had in place that helped you kind of get through that?
Wow. Yeah, that is a good question. I don't think that we didn't know what we were getting into, truthfully. And I think that was a good thing because when we started doing these flips and just doing the renovations, we discovered how different our approaches are on every single thing. And, that can make or break a relationship. When you start working with your partner, you then start to discover how much you love your partner and how much you want this to work, both the house and the relationship. Because, we would just have so many different approaches. We want, if I want to hang a painting, the way he will approach it, he will measure every single thing. And I'm kind of like, yeah, eyeball it. It should be good to go. We drive each other completely up the wall. But through that, it's been a good experience because we both learned how to divide up work and how to allow each other, like give each other space, because there are times when his need to measure every single thing is very good. But there are times when we just need to move really quickly and, it doesn't really matter so much as far as it looks good. So those are some I guess, interpersonal tools that are needed, especially if you're working with any kind of partner, even if it's not someone you're married to, but if it's just like a business partner and both of you decide to do some work together, it's really important to know each other's strengths, but also each other's methods, and give each other the room to do what they can do best. Because I would say it's not easy working with your partner, but once you get the flow of things, and once you are able to, just let each other be, and, have everyone be responsible for something, then really two heads are better than one.
What's going on, guys? Thank you for listening to the episode up until this point. Just wanted to take a minute just to highlight what Mario and me have going on in our businesses. So for me, I'm focused on short-term and medium-term rentals, where I'm looking to produce solid cash flow. So that includes vacation rentals and rental arbitrage, and that's a strategy that we kind of delve into in this episode. So make sure you listen out for that.
Yeah, and for me, we have a few properties that we picked up with the intention to flip prior to the recent series of interest rate hikes. We've since pivoted and are also looking into short-term rentals, which is definitely exciting. It's the first time for me. As Ron said, we'll definitely continue to share updates on an ongoing basis. So if you're interested in learning more or have any questions, please reach out. Our contact information is in the show notes. Enjoy the rest of the show. Yeah, that's great. And I agree, like definitely understanding your partner's skill sets or their strengths, as you mentioned, having that constant communication, and then ultimately staying in your lane, right?
Yes. It's so important to stay in your lane too, because I remember there would be things that, he is doing. One of the things that I hate doing is IKEA. Anything IKEA, IKEA, you can sponsor me, but I don't like building your stuff. But my husband loves it so much. And initially, we're thinking we're doing this together. Let's do everything together. And so I remember at one point it got to the kitchen setup, and I was trying to help him do something. It was driving him completely up the wall. He was like, I'm doing it wrong. I'm like, just put it together. It's fine. And at some point he was just like, you know what, maybe you should go do something else. And I was like, you know what, that's a great idea. And so at that point, we kind of discovered that, there are things that we don't actually have to do right at the same moment together. As far as we're getting the general work done, I can be painting. He hates painting. I don't mind painting. So while I'm painting, he's setting up, the cabinets and things like that. And at that point, we then realized like this can be so much easier, because we can both focus on the things that we either enjoy doing or don't hate doing. And it's usually the exact opposite of what the other person likes anyway. So once we got into that routine of things were much easier. And now we're renovating our house ourselves too. And I don't remember the last time we argued on something, because we're just like, you know what, it's fine. Like, this house is going to get renovated, but our marriage needs to survive. So, yeah.
That's crucial. I love the fact that you touched on that, and, just working on those interpersonal skills, as you said, and just really understanding how to make the team work, right?
Yes, so for sure.
That's crucial. You talked about IKEA, and I think just from following you on your journey, I feel like you have this passion for design, right? Where did this inspiration come from? And, how do you go about incorporating that into your projects? I feel like I see every story, it's about picking the tile and the faucets. I love that whole story that you had going with your gold faucets. Yes. So talk to us about that.
I think that first, in watching so much HGTV, let's start there. I think everything started from HGTV. But
they got to sponsor us.
they, honestly, at this point, they should. But in watching so much, one of the people that I really resonated with was Joanna Gaines from Fixer Upper. And, I loved how it was more than just, putting things together and making it a more modern space. It was really about like the touches, the things that made the home feel like home. And so going into my first property, that one of the things that I wanted to do was explore outside of what I was seeing in flips, which was a lot of grays and, whites. It was just, everything was very plain. So I remember my first feature wall was like a really bright or like a navy blue feature wall, more like a royal blue. It was like, okay, I want to explore these different colors and different things. And now I've committed to putting a feature wall in every property that I do, because I appreciate how it gives a unique touch to the property. Like even now in my current Airbnb, a couple of days ago, I got a message from guests and they were like, oh, I really love this design. That's why I chose your place. So I think that even with like just practically, it also helps my properties stand out, because it's not just a plain, gray wall with gray floors and gray everything else, but it makes it stand out, and I think it makes people feel more welcome. One of the things that I really like to do is set a mood. So that I think this is a way that I can explore that talent that I really never knew that I had. Picking tiles, picking colors, putting all these things together. Sometimes I get questions on, how do I find the inspiration, or how do I know what works together? And truthfully, I don't, but I'm never afraid to explore. I have some things that are like, I know black, will work for everything pretty much. But now it's like, starting to look at different designs, starting to read up and, go through Pinterest, see what other people are doing, but also just not being afraid to pick the most random colors and seeing like, how does this work together? And not being afraid to make a mistake. And, if it's paint, you can always repaint. If it looks bad, and I've done that multiple times, I'm like, yeah, this was not the right choice, and it's fine. I'm going to repaint it. It's okay. It's painful sometimes because it's like I spent so much time on this, but it's just this does not look good. And I think that for me is like a life motto. It's like, what's the worst that can happen? If it doesn't look good, you start again. Yeah. So that's kind of it.
I love it. Just you're so into your creativity. So I really love that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has made me stay in this business is because it gives me that opportunity for creativity. Like every single property is different. And I think that, I look at my properties as a fresh slate, like a blank sheet. And it's like, okay, what can I do with this? How can I explore colors, shapes, textures? How can I bring things together and make this place look good? And I think the more that I do it, the more confident that I'm getting. My first one, I was like, even though I went with a color that I didn't really see on the market as much, but I was scared to do more with it because I was like, okay, this is a color. Let me not do much more than just this color. But now it's like, yeah, let me throw in colors. Let me throw in wood textures, marbles, all of those things, blocks, and let's just see how it works. And I think that's part of life, practicing. Practice makes perfect, or maybe not perfect, but good enough. And that's really all that's needed.
Yeah, and just pushing the boundaries sometimes.
Yep.
So with everything that's happening right now, we touched on it a bit earlier. Interest rates are going up. People are a bit more cautious, so they're pulling back, not spending. So flipping doesn't seem like the ideal strategy right now. Like, how have you pivoted? Like, have you revisited any of those business goals and like, okay, we need to pivot and navigate through these tricky times? Like, what are you up to right now?
Yeah, really definitely. What is interesting to me is because the market now is interesting, but even before this shift started happening, towards the end of last year, I had decided that I was going to pivot this year. And I had decided that once I sold my final flip in February, that the next couple of properties that I was buying would not be flips. And I don't know. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was God, maybe it was just intuition, whatever. But I knew that I needed to change strategies. And what I started doing was to research, what other strategies are there? What other things can I be doing with my properties? And I think that's kind of where that design element that I liked came in, because I thought, okay, I'm seeing people in Airbnb in the short-term rental space. I like the design aspect, but I also like the fact that it's not a long-term rental. Not that I have anything against long-term rentals, but I knew that that just wasn't what I wanted to focus on at this particular time. And so having that short-term rental with the higher cash flow, because as much as I have built up capital from flipping, I still find there's a need for capital. So short-term rentals is a higher amount of cash flow that I can get versus a long-term rental. So I've pivoted into short-term rentals over the last couple of months. Closed on my first one in April, and then I'm working on some others now, and also arbitrage as well, which is an easier avenue too if you're not going to buy a property.
And for those that aren't familiar with arbitrage, can you just talk a little bit about what that is for our listeners?
Yeah. So arbitrage is basically you renting a property and agreeing with the landlord that you can sublet it. So by having that agreement, then you can furnish the property and then put it on Airbnb or other short-term rental sites. So you're kind of like, you're not buying the property, you're renting it, but it's your property when it's on Airbnb. So it's easier because when you're thinking of arbitrage, all you're considering is like your first and last month rent and your furnishing costs versus a property that you own, which is, the down payment, the closing costs, all the legal fees, and then, your furnishing costs as well. So for arbitrage, just numbers examples, you can arbitrage a property and just spend like $15K, including all your furniture and, your first and last months. There is no way in Hamilton, at least, and most of Ontario, you will buy a property, furnish it, all of that, and you only spend $15K. If you do, please call me. Let me know where and how.
Yeah, you'll be there.
I will be there.
Exactly.
No questions asked.
That's great. Definitely a creative strategy. Thanks for explaining that for our listeners. So we've talked a little bit about the systems you should have in place for dealing with contractors, managing family life. We touched on flips as well as short-term rentals. But you mentioned DIYs, which I want to go back to that. So for an investor looking to scale quickly, what advice would you give someone when it comes to considering DIY versus working with a general contractor? Like, what are some of those things they should consider? And then, like, who are some of the folks that they should have kind of within their circle or their power team when it comes to looking to scale and getting to that next level?
Yeah, it's a good question. So scaling is, I believe it's a factor of time and money. And a lot of times those work in opposite directions, a lot of times. So when you're just starting out, I like DIY because it's a learning experience. It gives you a good amount of knowledge and you're able to really understand what is going on. You're able to put your ear to the ground and understand the market, to know what is happening in the market of materials, labor, all of those things, because you're taking time. But that's also the downside. DIY takes time. To get our first property from, a complete gut to livable condition, it took 6 months. And before we sold it, that was another 5 months thereabout. So it took about a year to flip the first property. And that's because we did everything ourselves. The second property took 2.5 months. from purchase to reselling. And that's because we did nothing ourselves. We hired every single thing out. And so you can kind of see that it's time. But the first time we didn't have the money to hire it out. So there was no way it was going to take us 2.5 months because there was just no fun. Like we would have either been running away from the contractors after they did work from us, or there was just no way. So, when you're starting out, the DIY route is really good. But once you're starting to look at scale, once you start taking on more properties at a time, then DIY is not very practical, especially just depending on whether you have like a full-time job. Frankly, even if real estate is your full-time job, you can only be in one place at a time. And if you have multiple properties, it's not possible. So at the point where we finished the first one, I had already started building relationships with other contractors. I had started talking to people and figuring out, I knew that this was not sustainable because I knew that I wanted to own multiple properties at a time. And there was no way that I was going to spend 3 weeks doing demo for every single property. It wasn't practical. So for someone that wants to scale, it's very important to understand your limits. I still do some things DIY. I still, like my Airbnb, I did the feature walls. I did some painting because I just wanted to do that. I liked that type of thing. But other work was still going on. And for me, it's important to know how long things take. And if you really like DIYing, then it doesn't mean you can't do anything. But if scaling is your goal, then you have to limit the number of things that you can do. And so I guess that leads me to the power team, because having a contractor is an essential if you are going to do any kind of renovations. And having a good contractor, for me, the way I define good is, first of all, honest. That is actually my primary lookout for a contractor. And it's something that I feel like is very difficult to find. I hear so many stories of contractors starting work and just running away with people's money and just not completing the job well. So finding someone that is very honest is key for me. And how you find that person, look, we're all in, I can't tell you exactly. Maybe through a lot of prayer. I don't know.
Lots of trial and error.
Yeah, trial and error is the game that we're all playing. But yeah, having someone that is honest. And then, of course, in contractors, I also look for skill. Depending on what they're doing, some trades need a lot more skill than others. Demo, it requires some skill, but, you're not doing finishing work. But something that is finishing work, it requires someone with a good eye. So it's important to know where you can kind of cut costs and, maybe hire the cheaper guy versus where you need to pay attention. Like, don't hire the cheaper electrical guy because they can do complete damage to your house. But, maybe hire the cheaper demo guy because the job isn't too big. So things like that for me, those are things that I did learn on the job. And then other things or other people that for me are very essential are my realtor. And I only just found a realtor that I love. I think earlier this year. Took some time too. But if you're an investor, having an investor-focused realtor is so key. Most realtors are just buyer or end user focused. And I found that was a challenge because when I'm looking at numbers, I want my realtor to be able to present me with some numbers, with the comps and, with possible reno costs, things like that will make my life ultimately easier. And I can make a decision a lot quicker versus a realtor who is telling me that the painting is nice. Like, no offense to buyers, realtors, but, those types of things like that are not important to an investor. The things that are important are the numbers, the comps, things that make or break the property value. So having that person is very key because now my realtor can send me properties that are on or off the market and say, I think this will be a good fit for you because, and she will give me a long list of reasons. Also having a good lawyer, because I do JVs as well, having a good lawyer just to figure out all of the, nuances with the JVs and figuring out what goes where, who should sign what. I can't focus on those things. But for me, like the team is essential because the things that I do need to focus on, I can because I have other people that are focusing on like those other important things that I don't understand fully.
I love that. Yeah. Like it definitely, like it truly takes a village when you
Yes.
think about being successful. That's awesome.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the time, Abby.
Thank
It's
you
been
guys.
extremely insightful conversation. Once again, love the shout outs for HGTV, although they're not a sponsor.
Guys, you guys need to sponsor them.
Yeah.
HGTV, if you're listening,
100%. Put it out there.
sponsor.
Yeah. Before we let you go, if you could just share with our listeners, like what's next for Abby, as well as what's the best way that our listeners could reach out to you?
Yeah. What's next for me? So I'm setting up a second or third Airbnb right now. Still in the process of renos, all that fun stuff. The design aspect, kind of my favorite. Also, just partnerships, doing a lot of those as well, and really just exciting stuff. Even though the market is, seemingly down, this is a perfect time to buy because things are on sale. And so, yeah, still going despite any kind of challenges. And best way to reach me through Instagram or YouTube. My Instagram is at Black Equity _ and my YouTube is also Black Equity. So yeah, reach out to me, DM me. I respond. Sometimes I might be slow. Please forgive me in advance, but I do respond.
Abby, this is lovely. This was lovely. We definitely have to have you back on for part 2, so you could update us on how your short-term rentals are going. And hopefully by then you would have scaled up your flipping business as well.
Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. And this is fantastic. I think we need more of this, seeing more people of our race, our skin color, like in this space. And that's really a big part of why I started my page too, because I just wasn't really seeing so many of my people here. So I really appreciate what you guys are doing. And yeah, keep going. Yeah. HGTV is coming for this sponsorship.
Yes, put it out there.
I said it. It's going to happen. I promise.
Awesome. So to our valued listeners, thank you so much again for tuning in to this another episode. Hope you really enjoyed it. We enjoyed it. So catch you in the next one. Take care.
What was the one thing you heard today that inspires you to take action? Now plan to take that action in the next 24 hours. If you're looking for more support, ideas, or just want to connect with others like you taking action, join us in the Black Wealth Effect Facebook group. The link is in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the Black Wealth Effect podcast.